Et bonjour à tous, bienvenue sur la chaîne Decrypted. Aujourd'hui, deuxième interview. Je suis en compagnie de Dr Fletcher et d'un autre membre de la team de TIG. TIG, c'est un projet qu'on suit régulièrement sur Decrypted et je suis très très content de pouvoir vous proposer cette nouvelle interview. Hi John, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic, thank you very much. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thanks.
Good.
Donc cette interview, elle va être en anglais, mais je vais vous la traduire après coup au montage pour que vous puissiez la suivre avec juste les oreilles, pas besoin de regarder les sous-titres. Donc voilà, et on va directement commencer avec John. So John, you are the founder of TIG, right?
I am indeed, yes.
Can you, just to begin, can you explain the innovation game briefly for someone who don't have a technical background? Make it simple, the goal, what are you doing at TIG?
Absolutely, yeah, I'll do my best. So the objective of the innovation game is to incentivize people to develop more efficient algorithms for science, technology, AI, mathematics, really quite sort of low-level important things which sort of sit at the heart of a lot of these technologies. In the context of the innovation game, what people do with the algorithms is that they perform proof of work with them. So the proof of work is just to solve randomly generated instances of synthetic problems. So these are problems which are sort of qualitatively the same as real world problems, but they're just sort of randomly generated. So they have no real kind of specific utility in the real world. What the function that the proof of work serves is rather to sort the algorithms, to figure out which ones are the most efficient, because the miners want to mine most efficiently, and so they're sort of rational to pick the most efficient algorithm with which to mine. And it's important to note that if you want to use an algorithm to do mining in the innovation game, then it first has to be uploaded to the innovation game and available to all miners. So you can't get your own sort of private one. And then so they sort of differentiate on cheap electricity, fast hardware, like traditional crypto miners do. But in the innovation game, there's this additional dimension of which algorithm are you using. And then what we do is we see, we define the best algorithm, the one that deserves to get rewarded, as the one that's sort of been most widely adopted by the miners, who we call benchmarkers. And that one is rewarded with tokens, and we capture intellectual property, which is embodied in the algorithms, patents and copyright, and make it available to license. But everything is always available under a sort of an open license, which is free of charge, which comes with some obligations, data sharing obligations. But if you don't like the data sharing obligations, there is the option of a sort of paid commercial license, and that fee is payable in tokens. So that's the sort of value capture on the back end. So it's sort of an economic system that loops back the value which is embodied in the intellectual property which covers the algorithms back to the inventors and back to the people who assess the algorithms for sort of quality.
Okay, great. I think it's pretty clear. So to make it simple, TIG is a way to decentralize algorithm upgrade, I could say.
Algorithm development, yeah, make it open and decentralized.
Okay, great. So we talk about the project. Now it's time to talk about you. We dug a lot about the team, about Ying, Phil, or even Lee, but yourself, we don't have much, to be honest. And it's interesting. Who are you? What did you do before TIG? What brings you to blockchain? Explain everything.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, I do have a profile on the website, and also please feel free to add me on LinkedIn, and you can see some information there too. But my background is in physics and mathematics. I was a physicist initially, then I did a PhD in applied maths and theoretical physics at the University of Cambridge, which is where I am now. I'm in Cambridge, the city of Cambridge currently. And my project as a PhD student was to look at a way to sort of estimate the fractal dimension of a random fractal surface by looking at the way that it scatters light. So this is it's a little bit of physics, but it was mostly sort of, kind of mathematics of random processes. And then after that, I was sort of postdoc in the same department in the Faculty of Mathematics at the University of Cambridge for a while. And then I went into sort of blockchain research, I think sort of full time in around 2016, 2017. And sort of worked my way up. I had the core idea while I was a PhD student for the innovation game, but I hadn't sort of figured out the details. There were sort of various technological blockers that I didn't know how to overcome at that time. But it took me about maybe 10 or 11 years to figure out all the details, and now it's all up and running. So that's a very sort of truncated sort of version of my journey to where we are now.
Yeah, that's insane. Having an idea while being a student and waiting 10, 11 years to do it, it's beautiful. A long process in the brain to achieve it.
Absolutely, yeah. I never forgot about the idea, and one of the reasons why I wanted to work in blockchain research, because I wanted to be exposed to new ideas, which I hoped would help me sort of knock off these different milestones and sort of overcome these various sort of blockers which I identified for this grand idea of the innovation game. And I finally managed to get there, but it took a while. This is sort of a combination of understanding sort of economics, I would say, understanding sort of a bit about how open source works and the economics of science and the economics of open source. And a little bit of cryptography and maths, but not a huge amount.
Yeah, right. Perfect. Thank you. So we talk about you. We talk about blockchains. The team is how to say it? Quite complete. We have so Fear for the IP, Lee for the investor, Ying for the development, basically, we could say. So the team it's something rare to see a team like this, very prepared for the project. How did you unit this team, or did you find all the people working with you today?
Yeah, good question. So I met my co-founder. My initial co-founder was Ying Chan, who's our developer. I think we met in about 2016, and we were working in sort of blockchain research together. He's very much more on this coding side, although he knows a lot more maths than most coders do. Actually, he's kind of quite very multi-talented, and my specialism is really sort of mathematics. And I would say economics too, but I've never been formally trained in economics. It's just always been one of my passions, which I'd sort of learned about on the side. Somewhat later, we met, I think at first it was Lee Hughes, who's now our sort of head of commercial, our COO. We met him in a co-working space, in fact, in Cambridge. And this being Cambridge, people seem to have lots of interesting friends, and his best friend is Philip David, who used to work as head of IP at Arm Holdings here in Cambridge. You may have heard of Arm Holdings. They're a kind of a very famous company in technology IP. They design microchips and license the right to manufacture those microchips to big companies like Apple and Qualcomm and all of the giants really, and their chips are in every mobile device in the world, including and all Apple computers now as well, since they moved on to Apple Silicon. So they really were a sort of inspiring force in Cambridge. Everybody knows about them, and it was sort of it was a big thing to learn about intellectual property and how that works from Phil, because if you've got something worth selling, then you have to know about that stuff. It's not sort of just a detail; it's a fundamental part of the innovation game.
Great. So do you think your team today is ready to embody the fact to be maybe one of the biggest projects down here with a unique proposition of value? How do you position yourself in this space?
Yeah, I believe so. I think that TIG, as far as I know, has a rather unique position in the space. I think a lot of people ask us about sort of BitTensor, for example, and I would say that the BitTensor would be, if you had to pick one thing in the crypto space that was the closest to TIG, I would say pick that, but it's still very, very different. There were probably, maybe a sort of like 10% overlap with BitTensor, whereas the other projects, there's probably more like a 1% overlap. So they have kind of some aspects which are sort of similar, but really I say the core focus in our case is that we want to incentivize sort of open innovation, and the requirement in our case to upload these algorithms to the protocol before you can use them for mining, I think is quite unique, because in the scientific ethos they want everything to be open so you can build on one another's work, and that means you make progress a lot faster. Traditionally, the issue of that with that has been sort of value capture. People are hesitant to make their things open in case somebody steals their ideas. But we believe we have we have solved that problem. Really from the background in open source and the economics of open source, which gave us the sort of solution in that case. I think sort of with multiple proofs of work, and they interact in a certain way. You might know about this, and this means that the instability that people were traditionally worried about. If you could upgrade the algorithm that performs the proof of work, it was thought that the system would always be too unstable. But in our case, the strategy for solving that involves having multiple relatively independent proofs of work, such that they don't tend to be optimized at the same time, and they sort of bind one another in a sort of stable structure, and it looks like it can work in that case. So yeah, it was believed to be something that you couldn't do. I think even famous people like Greg Maxwell, I think he's a sort of famous Bitcoin developer and mathematician. He wrote a paper about the properties of proof of work, and one of them is that you cannot perform proof of work with an optimizable algorithm. But it looks like that we have managed to find a way to do that.
Great. So to continue, we heard some rumors that VC bought some TIG token. Can you first name it, if it's the case, or if you can't, can you at least say if they are Web 2, Web 3, or and if it's easy to know them, if there are well-known VCs?
Yeah, so I think the only one we've gone public with so far, yeah, there are several. So there are 3 at least, I think would count as VCs. I think it's 3. Certainly 3 well-known ones. I think there's only one of the names is public. The other ones are going to make themselves public soon. So I'm not going to sort of scoop their own announcement. But the one that has made public already is Delphi Digital, who are quite sort of, I think well known for doing thorough research. So we very much appreciated their thoroughness with which they researched the protocol and the value proposition of the innovation game. But there were a couple more names who will announce themselves quite soon.
Perfect. So to talk about some blockchains more, why did you choose Base as the chain for the TIG token? What was the motivations? Why on Base and not, I don't know, another layer 2 optimism, Arbitrum? Tell us more.
Yes. So the token being on Base will be a temporary thing because we are going to deploy our own L1 chain. But we will stick with Base for the token, probably for at least another year, I think. Base sort of made sense for us. We like the fact that it used ETH for fees. It didn't have its sort of own token. It just makes it a bit more, a bit more low risk just to hold ETH if you wanted to be making transactions. Of course, it was very cheap. I think the main things were we're quite concerned about, especially having a sort of a top lawyer as one of our co-founders. We're quite concerned about regulatory compliance and the perception of that. The Base, as you probably know, is run by Coinbase, who are sort of regulated and pretty one of the more compliant crypto companies, especially in the US. So we wanted sort of that sort of perception of I guess compliance and legitimacy. And also the founder, one of the co-founders of Coinbase, you probably might know, Brian Armstrong, is very into science, sort of decentralized science. So we thought it was a kind of a coincidence of interest there. So given the TIG's interest in science, we thought that would be compatible.
Perfect. And you're just saying that you will launch your own layer 1. So at the moment it's not live, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So why did you choose to launch your own layer 1 when some Tao maxes are saying that you could be just, for example, a subnet or basically don't have a chain, maybe? Why having your own layer 1? Or what are the benefits? What are the cons, the negative points? Tell us more.
Yeah, so I think that there is a bit of a history of people who have some kind of protocol in crypto, and when a new one comes along, they say, "Why don't you just become a subset of our protocol?" I think you probably remember back in the Bitcoin days when Ethereum launched, they're like, why isn't Ethereum just a side chain? Someone else launches their protocol, they're like, why don't you just do it as a smart contract in Ethereum? I think at the end of the day, it's an interesting. I don't know. To be honest, I'm a bit skeptical that the innovation game could be a subnet on BitTensor. You'd have to explain that one to me. But in general, the answer is quite simple. It gives you more sort of flexibility and freedom to design things precisely how you want. So that's the real reason why we want to have our own sort of layer one. We have quite a different economic proposition. If you think about it, we're capturing IP, which is all going into one sort of large portfolio. A bit analogously, I think, as to how large open source projects capture IP. Linux, for example, has all sorts of copyright and even patents that they have licenses to the patents assigned to them if they're covered by the contributions to Linux, and that's sort of all managed by the Linux Foundation. In our case, we're going to make that available to license. So then, of course, the licensing revenue is what gives you demand for the token. So I'm not quite sure how that would work if you're using somebody else's token. I mean, you're more at the kind of mercy of the other things which are going on. And so because the economics are quite unique, I don't think any a crypto project before has had the value proposition that they're capturing IP and making it available for license to generate revenue. It makes sense for us to do something bespoke in this case.
That totally makes sense. The question was more about the people that are saying that could be just a subnet, but it's not that easy. It's not. You cannot do whatever you want. You need to be. You need to fit in the bit tensor system. So it's not that easy, and it makes totally sense.
Yeah, indeed. If you want to send us some detailed suggestions of exactly how it's done, I certainly would be interested to know. But yeah, I think you get the gist of it. It's just very different economically.
Yeah, totally. So just to talk more about TIG, are you going to plan to add more problems? At the moment, if I'm right, there are 4 problems. For example, JustR used to mean TIG token a few weeks ago. And he told me that it's a lot of work to compare all the problems, make all the proof of work mechanism. So every time you add another problem, you give more benchmark to do to miners.
Yep.
Is there any limit to this? How many problems can you add at the moment and in the future? How is it scalable at the moment?
Yeah, good question. So there's no upper limit to the number of problems or challenges, as we call them in the context of TIG, that we can introduce. So as you know, each one of them corresponds to a different type of proof of work. The real sort of constraint would be if you add too many, the reward for each one of them would be less. So you really should add them as the protocol grows. So as we sort of add them preemptively, and protocol with token value would be expected to sort of go up because the range of IP that you can collect increases. But you shouldn't add too many too fast, because otherwise people would have a reduced incentive to sort of work on each one of the challenges. So we're going to grow the challenges as the protocol scales in sort of, I guess, market capitalization over the next, I would say, sort of 3 to 5 years. I would expect, it's a bit hard to estimate, but I would expect that we end up with somewhere in the order of the high hundreds of challenges of different proofs of work in the end. This is because if you know sort of a bit about mathematical sciences, often there are these sort of primitives that you have, and you can do sort of much more complicated calculations, but a lot of these problems are sort of subroutines, kind of primitive building blocks in more complicated problems. So what we aim to do is to sort of add the more fundamental type ones, and then of course people can use them as a sort of subroutines or subparts in more complicated types of programs. But there are, probably of the order of, quite a few hundred at least of these sort of very important types of primitive problems. Occasionally you get sort of new ones, but actually the set of sort of potential challenges is relatively stable over time. It's one of the things a lot of people don't realize. A lot of these things that they solve in machine learning, for example, try and find a minimum value of a high dimensional non-complex function. I mean, this is probably something that Gauss or something, or Laplace, was trying to figure out back in the day. So the problems themselves are often not really new. What is new is the better techniques and methods for solving the problems. You have much more powerful, much more efficient techniques of finding these sort of minimum gradients and so on these days. So we feel the problem set is reasonably stable. So we kind of load it up, and then it will it might occasionally change, a bit like the American Constitution. You might get an amendment once every few decades or something, but it'll be pretty stable relative to the first 3 to 5 years when they'll be added in quite quick succession. So yeah, to answer your problem, answer your question directly, there is no upper limit except for it's limited by the basically the value of the token and the market capitalization.
Okay, great. So we were talking about those IPs. I think it could be maybe a confusion. There are lots of different IPs when we read the white papers, even though there are lots of them that are not necessarily needed to understand what TIG is. Can you first maybe saying what are the main IPs? What are IPs first? And with the time, with the protocol and TIG getting bigger and bigger, the algorithm getting bigger and bigger, robust also. When will you start to sell those IP? To who? Have you any plan yet or not? It will be in the future.
Yeah, so the IP, so do you mean the sort of pieces of intellectual property such as patents and copyright?
Yeah.
So we will sort of contractually, we will never sell them. It's a bit like sort of in Linux, if you kind of, assign some copyright or something of your contribution for Linux, like it won't be sort of traded or sold. It sort of stays within the property of the Linux Foundation. And, this is the contractual agreement. You give it on the condition that it is not sort of sold on. We would hold it within the TIG Foundation, and we make the IP available for license. Sort of natural customers for that, there's sort of many. Really, anybody who uses computational algorithms. There are kind of aggregators of algorithms, people like MathWorks, who sort of make very sort of optimized implementations of algorithms and make them as put them as part of their software package, which they then license out. Of course, even a company which, I don't know, does medical scanning with an MRI machine. I mean, they use sophisticated algorithms to turn the measurements of the magnetic fields into image of the human body. And of course, famously, AI companies, if they can have a machine learning technique, version of gradient descent or a neural network architecture, which is more efficient, they can have huge savings. And, for example, the transformer architecture, which is the hot thing in neural networks, ended up being about, I think it's sort of 20x or so, 20 times more efficient than the previous generation. So these things can be, not only very advantageous, they can be absolutely essential. If your competitor had a 20x advantage in training a machine learning model, you simply wouldn't be able to compete. So these are extremely powerful pieces of IP. Sometimes they can be literally, essential and indispensable. And this is why we want to make it so that these things are always available under an open license, which we call the TIG Open Data License, under certain conditions, to use free of charge, as well as under a sort of, reasonably priced, non-discriminatory commercial license. So the stage at which we are selling these licenses, we haven't reached that yet. I should just give a bit of background. So the innovation game, strictly speaking, is been running for about 8 months, but we've only been actively bringing people in, benchmarkers and innovators, for about 3 months. So in those 3 months, we've had, I think, well over 100, maybe sort of 127 or so at last count, different contributions of algorithms for the 4 challenges that we've had. So we're still sort of accumulating the IP. And the stage at which we kind of collate it and license it is, this is happening at the moment. But in fact, we raised our funds like relatively recently, so we're also recruiting people to help us with this job of sorting through this and assessing the, which things are worthy of being licensed and which are not. So it's ongoing is the question.
Okay. And I do have a question. So you talk about there are 2 different IPs, like the open one, the open source one, that people can use free of charge,
yes.
and the one to rent, basically.
Yes, 2 different licenses for the external users of the IP. That's right. There's also another license for people, benchmarkers, for example, because they have the right to use the IP, the algorithms to do benchmarking. Also, innovators have a special license because they have the right to use it free of charge to improve on others' work and also resubmit it into the innovation game. So in fact, in total, there are 5 licenses, but only 2 of them are for external people wanting to use the IP for a application outside of the innovation game.
Yeah. And basically, a reflection that I got when I first introduced to TIG, I talked with one of the business developer. I don't remember his name. Sorry about that.
All right.
Basically, when I read the white paper, I thought so the IP that can be renting, and
Yes.
the open source one is also a way to create value, because people will use it, will improve it. So it's basically return some value to TIG, and TIG, the valuation of TIG is getting bigger with the use case.
Yes, absolutely. So this is a very important point. So it's it would be untrue to say that only the commercial license puts value into TIG. A very, very large amount of the value comes from people who will use all the IP sort of free of charge. It's a copyleft license, which is sort of got quite a common sort of clause in the sort of GNU licenses under which Linux's license have this feature, but it also has this so-called open data requirement, which means that if you were to process some data and make a product out of the output or distribute the output, that you'd be obligated to make the input data available. So sort of two types of openness of the code of the implementation of the algorithm, and also it encourages openness of the data, because all these algorithms process data. And there are exemptions for things like private data, but in general, if you want to use it for free and then you make a product out of the output, you'd be obligated to make your input data available. And it's important to realize that this, it sounds a bit of a funny condition, but for scientists, for example, this will just be natural for them, because by the norms of science, they're supposed to make all of the data available, which allows their result to be replicated by anybody else in order that it can be checked. And scientists kind of traditionally have been some of the a lot of the biggest algorithmic breakthroughs in history have been made by academic scientists. So these guys by experimenting with this, by using our IP for free, they would be naturally kind of incentivized to both keep it open, share the relevant data, and also if they come up with something better, they can submit it to the innovation game, and they have a source of revenue potentially which complements their academic grants or the money they might got from the government or a charitable institution, which are sort of traditional sources of funding for academic people. And it doesn't unlike a lot of these kind of opportunities to earn extra money for academics, it doesn't necessitate that they compromise their principles of openness. Because sometimes if you take a grant, maybe for a commercial company, the deal is, okay, if you discover something, let us know about it first, or we'll file a patent on it and we'll own the patent, and then we have the right to exclude people from using it. In this case, there's none of that. If it goes into the innovation game, it's open, free of charge for anybody to use, under the terms of the open data license. So we hope that this is very aligned with the kind of the norms of the academic science world.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Maybe people are not familiar with how science work, in fact, but we basically the spirit of science. I'm not a scientist, of course, but what I see, what I read, is that the goal is to work together and make it. Basically, collaboration is the unique force of science, and TIG is the mechanism of TIG are completely in emphasize this philosophy in science.
Absolutely. We designed it to be entirely complementary and to be in line with the sort of norms of science and, what the scientists believe in. As you rightly say, they want to make their work open because science progresses so much more quickly when there's open debate and people can build on one another's work. They're not saying, oh, you're not allowed to, build something off my work because I have the patent and you're not allowed to do it and this sort of thing. So we use patents and copyright, again, in the similar spirit to open source, to keep things open. Famously in open source, copyleft was a sort of inversion of copyright. Previously, it was a property right which had been used to sort of exclude other people. And then the sort of great genius of Richard Stallman, who was the sort of founder of the free software movement, is that he discovered a way that you could use the same property right, but to keep things open and available for anybody to use, rather than to exclude people. It includes people, and we're doing the same thing with patents as well. And this is quite interesting because patents are really required to cover the IP in algorithms. You can't just have copyright, because a lot of algorithms are like they pack in a lot of sort of genius, incredibly concentrated ideas, but they're relatively short pieces of code when you implement them, which means that the copyright could potentially be avoided simply by re-implementation. So you have to be able to capture the idea as well as the implementation of the idea, and that's why TIG works the way that it does.
Perfect. I think it's perfectly clear. So even though it's not the main goal of TIG to monetize those IPs, those algorithms, etc., you in the white paper you say that it will only be in TIG token that people can rent and buy some IPs. Do you think it can be a friction to not allow to buy and rent with stablecoins? Do you plan to add it in the future? I know that selling IPs is the next step far beyond where we are now.
Yes.
Do you have any plans with stablecoin? Do you think it's a
yeah, absolutely. This is a great point. So a lot of people who would want to license this sort of IP would not be sort of crypto native type people. So we, even though we say that the fee is charged in tokens, in practice we do plan to make it a lot easier for them. We'll offer a service whereby they can just pay us in fiat currency. Not even necessarily stablecoin, maybe some sort of a bank transfer to the TIG Foundation, and then we use the money to buy the TIG tokens in the open market. So we sort of just facilitate that to make it lower friction and make it easier as to what people are used to, because this is selling to people who are outside of the traditional crypto industry. So we want to make it as easy for them as possible. But that's a very good question.
Okay, perfect. We expect it because today the goal is to abstract the chains, abstract blockchains, abstract accounts. So it totally makes sense that it's available to buy with stablecoins or with fiat, and you do the exchange with a TIG token. So it's great to hear that it's in the plans, even though it will be in many years from now.
It might be a little bit, we'll see. Hopefully sooner rather than later, but it's going to be exciting.
I expect so. Maybe any alpha, but we will come up to that point more further. I think there is also a subject about a DAO, decentralized autonomous organization. Basically, do you have any idea of how it can be used in TIG? Can the IP sold and rents go to this DAO treasury that could improve and enhance the protocol? Do you have any plan about it?
So can you just clarify a bit what you more about mean about DAO? That it's do you mean that the sort of people would vote on what to do with the funds, for example?
Basically, yes.
So it's an interesting question. So we don't have a plan to do that, and the reason is that I think one of the special things about the innovation game is that the players in the game are sort of remunerated on a market basis. So as I said before, the key players are the innovators, really, that kind of submit what they hope are sort of more efficient algorithms, and then the benchmarkers, who are the miners, will naturally adopt them. So the miners, obviously the more solutions they find sort of per unit time, and the more efficiently they mine, the more profitable they will be. And then the innovators are sort of remunerated just based on their adoption by the miners. So it's a bit like if you had a product, the more people who buy it, the more money you would get, and the longer it stays the top product, in its field, of course, the more money you would get. So there's sort of a breadth and also a length. And it's quite important. I would say it's hard to overemphasize what a key feature this is, because it means that there are no sort of committees of people deciding whose algorithm is better than another. And one of the reasons why this is important is because what algorithm is better is can be very difficult to establish. I mean, if you have an algorithm, for example, that runs more efficiently on some particular type of hardware, someone might say, this deserves to be rewarded because it's better than the previous generation. But what if this hardware is very expensive or very low availability? Is it really a better algorithm at all? Well, maybe not, because it doesn't have as much practical impact. So in our case, we can just leave it entirely to the market. We just say whichever one's being used mostly by the miners is the better one. And so we don't need people trying to make decisions on whose algorithm is better. Because it's a this is almost the key problem. It's very difficult to make such judgments. You can have sort of experts, but even sort of experts they can't tell about the availability of different hardware, in different places, the cost of electricity. They can't take these things into account. Only a market can. And so we won't really have a kind of treasury or a surplus to be deployed as such. We have temporarily, because we need a bit of money to put in certain, develop the different challenges to put in and so on, and to cover patenting costs. But ultimately, all of the revenue from the licenses just gets routed back by a market mechanism to two classes of people: the miners and the innovators. And there are no decisions to be made. There are no committees or sort of necessary in that case. And I think that is a good thing, because funding allocated by committee is often necessary, but it's usually because there is no clear market mechanism to allocate the funding. And it's sort of, it's a sort of backup.
Yeah, so basically you are saying that there is no need for a DAO in the TIG mechanism, and it makes sense, because it's a free market and you leave the algorithm, the miners, the innovators do whatever they want. And
exactly, and it's a bit of a subtle one, because if you imagine, these miners are they're a sort of new class of users for these algorithms. Like, normally people are using algorithms to, perform Fourier transforms because they want to, build a bridge, or, kind of design a better type of radio, or, train a neural network for some purpose. But in our case, these miners are just doing it because they earn tokens. That's it. These aren't real problems that they're solving. And so that market, that source of demand created by these miners, is the core of assumption is it's almost a sort of proxy for what the real market is. So the value of the miners assign, which is the better algorithm, should be sort of at least directionally or roughly the same as what the real world assigns to the algorithms when they start being used for practical applications. And this sort of bridges the gap between these two things, because applications often come a lot later. But in the meantime, there can be some sort of systematic mechanism for pricing these algorithms, which doesn't involve subjective judgments by people. And I think that's a kind of that's probably the heart of it, I would say.
Perfect. Totally makes sense. So I will continue basically about marketing part. You were, I could say, a stealth launch. You started to onboard more people 3 months ago, basically. Do you have any plan about marketing, maybe listing, or even KOL, key opinion leaders, that are like very common on X, for example? Do you have any plan to do so? Do you need it? Tell us more about the marketing part.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we are, we have been a sort of little bit below the radar for a while. One of the reasons is that, although through word of mouth, quite a few people have heard about it, such as yourself, we wanted to make sure that everything was working in quite a robust way before we bring in the sort of mass market. So we haven't really, as you've probably seen, been doing much marketing. We've been, sending out the occasional tweet, but nothing sort of systematic and concerted. That is all still to come. We do plan to do that. Hopefully, if all goes well, it will be quite soon after this sort of the upgrade that we're deploying sort of at the end of this week and the beginning of next week. We learned so many things from these last few months in terms of, ways that miners could make money that were perfectly rational for them, but weren't really incentivizing the type of innovation that would be valuable for license. And so we've done some kind of tweaking and honing. And this is the kind of thing that only sort of real world scenario could tell you. That a lot of this stuff, you couldn't reasonably have predicted it. But it seems to all be converging to a sort of a stable state, or that there have been a few sort of tweaks and modifications and patches. So all being well, fingers crossed, with this next upgrade, if it has the effect that we hope, we feel that we'll probably be ready for a wider audience. They kind of go to the mass market, I would say. In terms of what our plans are for that, I'm not the marketing guy, but we have some very experienced people on board who've been helping us with that sort of thing. They've been sort of they were specializing in sort of stealth marketing in a sense so far, getting sort of miners, I think early miners from Casper and BitTensor and people like that to come on board to really sort of stress test the system. But these are sort of more kind of technical crypto people, and the next stage will be to get it out to the masses, I feel, and also to the scientists. So for the last 3 months, it's been, I mean, at least in the UK, it's been sort of like a university vacation, but everybody's coming back, I think, next week, and we feel like, I mean, of course, like scientific scrutiny is, in a sense, always the most difficult to pass. A lot of scientists are, very skeptical of crypto and, maybe think it doesn't have anything to do with them. And so, one of our objectives has been, once the new term starts and people are back at universities, we want to be sort of ready to present to something which will sort of hopefully meet with their high standards and expectations.
Yeah, onboarding scientists is like the most important part maybe of TIG, because without scientists you can't have some development. So the students coming back to schools, and it will be a great moment to onboard more people.
Absolutely, everybody's very open-minded in the first few weeks of term. So we're definitely pushing the word out, here in Cambridge and beyond at many universities. We have plans to do over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, there are 3 questions that come in mind. I will do it one by one. First, maybe the smallest one. What are your links with Cambridge? So as far as I understood, Cambridge was the first test of TIG where you had an hackathon, if I'm right, in Cambridge. Yes. So is it because you were part of Cambridge first? Why Cambridge, and what are your links to Cambridge?
So I've several links to Cambridge. I actually grew up here in Cambridge, which is the first link. I attended Cambridge University as a PhD student, and I also worked as an academic for a while in the maths department for several years. I also founded what was then called the Cryptographic Currency Society back in about 2016, I think, or maybe 2015. It was earlier, which was one of the first societies, I think, after MIT. I think they had a Bitcoin society first, which has now evolved into the Blockchain Society, which is like a massively bigger and more popular than it was when I first founded it. So we still have links, in fact, with the Blockchain Society here at Cambridge University. Where actually they heard of me and my colleagues who started it back then, because our first speaker that we got, the very first guy we got to come, was Vitalik Buterin, who gave a talk, a lecture in Cambridge, sort of our inaugural society lecture. So this is sort of like a legendary event in the, at least in the society circles. So our kind of links with them are pretty strong. I have no official Cambridge University position these days, but I still do know, several old colleagues from my days as a PhD student and an academic who are still here. So Cambridge is quite a small town, and you sort of bump into people quite a lot. So that's really kind of extent of our links with the university.
Perfect. So the 2 more questions are, you were talking about the stealth launch you were doing for 3 months. Basically, I think that TIG maybe explode is notoriety. One day there are threads that are making thousands of views, and people are listening to TIG and understand what it is. Did you was it planned, or was it like something you didn't expect to arrive so soon? What was your reaction the day that TIG was kind of aware on the social networks?
Yeah, it was a bit curious, because obviously I've been developing it for like 11 years, and it's always sort of been a lot kind of in my head. It was a bit of a surreal experience. We did sort of half expect people to start talking about it on Twitter, because some of the people who found out about it earlier, as I said, there's a sort of there is a kind of a link with BitTensor, in the sense that people think that there is some overlap with the ideas. And so a lot of early BitTensor people were interested, that they found it quite easy to understand the idea. And one of the things that BitTensor has done very well is sort of like guerrilla marketing of word of mouth. And I think, I don't really know who these people are personally, but a lot of them have a sort of like big Twitter followings. Once they became interested in TIG, they started to talk about it. And then I think it spread quite quickly because of these guys. I think the sort of guerrilla marketing part of it was due to them, and I suppose they saw some potential in it. They understood the idea, and we weren't really told it was going to happen, and it wasn't orchestrated either. But it was something that we kind of expected because we knew these people had large Twitter followings, and they had done similar things, I think, to spread awareness of BitTensor in the early days.
Yeah, we could say that it's even a good point for TIG, free marketing, free awareness, and people that are kind of enjoying the product. If they are testing it, for several months, it means that it works and they find it cool.
Well, absolutely, yeah. It's good to get these people's endorsement, and there are a lot of kind of miners who are, I think, mining in the innovation game as well. Yeah, this is one of the things it probably has in common with BitTensor is there's probably more skill than a lot of regular proof of work protocols. So it tends to attract these very competitive, sort of highly skilled types of miners who are kind of who also sort of very sort of vocal and probably just like big personalities in general. So they seem to be talking about TIG online too, which I guess is a good thing. Publicity is good.
Yeah. And my last question is, you talked about the next upgrade that TIG is gonna push really soon.
Yes.
What is the point of this upgrade? Can you maybe tell us some alpha, something that isn't live yet, isn't known yet? What will be the goal of this upgrade? Basically, if you can tell us.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So one thing that we realized, and sort of one kind of issue that people could complain about online, whether rightly or wrongly, is that there was a point at which one of the miners started to become sort of very dominant. And so, before that, that more miners had been successful in earning sort of, decent numbers of tokens. And when this one miner, who's just a sort of a particularly skilled miner, I think, started to become more dominant, the natural thing in a proof of work protocol is, for smaller miners to join mining pools. And one of the reasons why sort of mining pools are more, are kind of, good for small miners is it sort of spreads out the variation of their rewards. And in fact, it's known that they can have a remarkable effect. So I kind of, for a long time, thought that mining pools were just a bit of an optional extra. But in fact, there are kind of published papers which show that you can have roughly 10 times more people successfully competing as miners, on an economic basis, earning more tokens, to the value of which exceeds their costs, with mining pools than without mining pools. So 10x is a very, very large number. And also we realized that in the innovation game, mining pools, if anything, are even more important. And one of the reasons is that if you have a sort of the way that it works, you should mine all of the proofs of work. But if you have a sort of variation in your success, so say you've got sort of 5 proofs of work and you're earning like a lot of this and like half as much of that one, a little bit more of that one, then you get penalized for a so-called imbalance penalty. So what you should do to be optimal is to make it sort of more likely that all of your proofs of work are quite similar level. But the thing is, when you're a smaller miner, just by stochasticity, just by a random chance, you're more likely to be out of balance, just because, if you're only finding 3 solutions for this one, and you find 2 for this one and 1 for this one, this is sort of triple the number of this one. So it's like that proportionally, it's much easier to be out of balance if you're a small miner. So that's it's almost like a double penalty. And so we kind of realized this, and we thought mining pools would be, desirable. And in the back of my head, I'd always thought, okay, so we'll just set up a mining pool. But in fact, there was something about the way that the innovation game works, which with its current configuration made mining pools very difficult. And just to sort of go into it quite quickly, what that is that if pools operate, so you have a pool operator, and then you have sort of pool members who are sending their solutions often to the pool operator, who's kind of aggregating them and then will interact with the chain directly. And the pool operator really needs to know that the pool members are at least trying to find solutions. So they might be quite small miners. So they might find one very, very infrequently. But every time that somebody in the pool gets a solution, they all share the rewards. And this is kind of the point of the mining pool. But you have to know that those guys are trying to find a solution. Otherwise, they could just be free riding, pretending that they're trying and they're not. And then they get a share of the reward, which would be unfair. And the way that TIG worked before is that basically, to cut a long story short, it was you could tell that the person had done the work when they found a solution, but you couldn't tell that they had been trying to find a solution. So in sort of the more traditional hash-based proof of work, what they do is they send in these so-called hash shares, which are sort of lower difficulty things. So they're not worth anything in terms of Bitcoin, but like it's a way for the pool operator to check that this guy is really mining because he finds these lower difficulty solutions less often. That wasn't possible with the way that the innovation game was configured. So we're changing it to make it possible. And so mining pools will be possible. So mining pools, again, they sound like, so what? It's a bit of an optional extra. Actually, it's very, very important, especially in the innovation game. So this is the main purpose of this particular upgrade to enable mining pools.
Yeah, that's cool. Any time estimated arrival for it?
Yeah, I wouldn't like to put a deadline on it because my colleague Ying is like working around the clock and we put more pressure on him. But it looks like it's going to be probably ready by early next week. Fingers crossed. Which was a little bit longer than we had hoped, but it's these things sometimes can be a bit difficult to estimate. But it is. I mean, I would assure people it's going to be worth the wait because it's a very significant upgrade, and it's going to make those smaller miners who want to be involved able to be competitive again. So that's a very positive thing.
That's great. Well, Dr. Fletcher, I don't have any question more. It's been 50 minutes, something like this. It was really cool. And I just have one last question. Today, in our world, what would you say to a young investor, a young crypto believer, to pursue its crypto journey? What will be your advice, your philosophy you want to tell to a young person today?
I would say, I certainly wouldn't give any investment advice, but I would say remain interested in crypto because the set of things which work and are impactful is not empty. Like some people, these kind of like verge on skepticism or kind of like extreme optimism. Both of which I think are very dangerous. So I would say that most things in crypto, to me, simply don't make sense, but some do. And so there are those gems in there. But one of the things I would say that makes it difficult is to sort the noise from the real, the kind of real opinions. And a lot of the information in crypto is sort of transmitted over social media, for example. You get sort of huge numbers of people saying X, Y, or Z is the next big thing and is absolutely fantastic. I guess what I would say to that is that, people believe that the most absurd things are absolutely fantastic, right? Like, I don't want to, it's sort of like, I don't want to diss you, some kind of, cult members or something like that. It's sort of just because a lot of people are saying something makes sense, it doesn't mean it makes sense. And what I would advise you do is you go and find somebody who's really smart, who's probably not in crypto, and ask them, does this make sense? That would be my advice, to give them some sort of. And the thing is, often the answer is going to be disappointing. They're just going to say no, and to be honest, they're probably right. But I would say, maybe bring somebody who's like an AI expert, who's not into crypto, who's like an academic or your smart uncle. Get him to look at the innovation game and ask him what he thinks of that. And send us the result because we're very interested to know.
Well, I think it's the better way to finish it. Mr. Fletcher, thank you for your time. Thank you for accepting this invitation. And we look forward to seeing the TIG development.
Pleasure. Great to speak to you.
See you next time. Thank you for having watched Decrypted. Bye, guys. And see you, Mr. Fletcher.
Bye.